everyone, and welcome to Writing Easy, the podcast that takes the act of writing, which can sometimes be not easy, and tries to make it less not easy. I'm one of your hosts, Mary Mascari.
And I'm your other host, Melissa Long.
So this week, we are going to talk about writing competitions. I've always thought that writing should be an Olympic sport. It'd be fascinating to watch for me. But that's not what we're talking about, right? There's lots of writing competitions, and they can be kind of a fun thing.
Yeah, they can kind of be a fun thing sometimes. Have you ever done a competition? Have you ever entered?
I have. Now, I will say when I was in middle school, I entered a poetry contest in which I did a poem that was in the style of Ogden Nash, if you're familiar with that poem.
Yeah.
Yeah, he's hilarious, and, it's very silly and funny, and I loved it, and so that's what I did, an Ogden Nash poem, and I remember they had a little tea for the people who had won, that's like, I think probably everyone who entered, because it was at the little bookstore, and it was me and a bunch of old ladies, of which I am now one, but, and I remember they said, like, oh, it's kind of like haiku. I'm like, sure, whatever, haiku, yep, all right. But besides that, I've done Writers of the Future a couple times, which is an interesting one. I think that's it, though. I don't think I've done other competitions. How about you?
I've done a couple. They're really popular with Romance Writers of America. They have, a lot of their chapters have different types of competitions. So they have, your Meet Cute competition and your first chapter competition, and then they have the Golden Hearts and things that look at the whole novel. So there's those kinds of competitions, which I've entered a few of. And then in screenwriting, there's a ton of competitions.
Oh, yeah.
Because it's a lot harder to get somebody to read your material. So that is one of the big gateways that they're like, oh, if you just final or semifinal in a competition, somebody will read your stuff and you'll get a chance to... Your
career is made.
Yes. Your career is made. You've won the lottery. And congratulations. At least
Pick
that's
up
the
your
promise.
Emmy at the door. Yep. That's how it goes. Yeah. They're fun. Writers of the Future is an interesting one. It's for science fiction and fantasy. And it's always freaky because it's L. Ron Hubbard's Writers of the Future. And everyone's like, oh, God, it's Scientology. But it's not. It's completely separate. They say it over and over. Really, we're not going to... scan your thetans or anything like that. It's not, it's different. And yeah, it's something you can enter. Actually, if you are a science fiction fantasy writer, I do recommend entering it because they have them every quarter, I believe. And, you send your stuff in, and if you start to do well, you can get some feedback. You can get something noticed. If you win, you get a big pile of cash, but you have to be unpublished. You can't have sold anything, or you disqualify. So I did it for a while, and then what they called pro'd out. I'm a professional. I sold something for $10. Here you go, kid. I'm like, great. Well, now I can't enter this other contest where I could potentially win, $500. But all right, sure, thanks. But no, it's a good contest. It's kind of fun.
Yeah, so I guess that's one of the things that I wanted to talk about contests, because I hear people with mixed experiences and responses, and there's all different types of contests. It's when you can Google writing contest or writing competition online and get a billion entries and then not know which ones are legit, which ones are actually going to be helpful, and which ones aren't. Almost all of the ones with Romance Writers of America are competitions that you have to pay an entry fee for. So it can become very expensive. Not all of the screenwriting ones that I've entered require a payment, but some of them do. And again, they can get incredibly expensive if you're entering one or multiple projects. So I know people who get addicted to entering competitions and never publish or get an agent or editor, but they just keep getting that gratification from placing in really small competitions that aren't advancing their career. So I wanted to talk about some of the pros and cons and things to watch out for, and just, what's the argument for doing it versus not.
I think that's a good thing.
And how do you stay sane? Because you can enter a lot of competitions and not place.
Yeah. I think, for a pro thing, I can kind of see how it would help because it's a little more objective, right? Because when you're particularly, I'm trying to talk about short stories because it's usually what a contest is. It's going to be poetry or short story, or obviously screenplay is going to be something bigger, but usually it's not like a novel contest because they're just too big. But like if you're submitting short stories, you can get rejected for millions of reasons that have nothing to do with the quality of your piece. And so with a contest, it's that is lessened. Obviously, it's always subjective because that's what we're doing. I mean, there's no timer, there's no bar to clear. It's just subjective. But it's like if you're submitting something to a magazine and they could reject you, even though they really love the story you wrote, but they just bought another story about the same thing last year or last month or whatever. Or, I only have space in this month's issue for a 500-word story, and you've written a 700-word story, so sorry. It could be anything. So a competition theoretically takes away some of those factors, and that's kind of nice.
Yeah, and I think it allows you to experiment more because you can write stuff that is not necessarily marketable. When you're trying to sell something, they want to know what's the genre, what's the type, like what's the mold. You have to be able to replicate it. You have to sign a deal where you're making like 10 books, right? Like there's all of these things that are focused on the marketing and the branding of the story. And the feasibility of attracting the right audience. But if you're just doing a competition, it gives you the flexibility to play with something where people may not be like, we're ever going to create this or make this or publish it. But it allows us to see you as a really great writer with a vivid imagination. And it can still help you build relationships, get exposure. And
definitely.
Yeah.
And it gives you a little bit of a reality check too. Because, that's... Sometimes it's really hard to tell. Like, am I any good? And submitting or querying will not tell you that because you just get so many false negatives. Whereas a contest might tend to correlate a little bit more. You can start to see, oh well, I'm doing well. Okay, there's the quality of the work. Okay, that can really be helpful.
Yeah. Now I prefer competitions that give feedback. Not all of them do. But usually if they give feedback or judges notes, they will tell you that on the website when you apply. So you can use that to sort of filter through. Because if you get a really low score, you don't place, and you have the feedback, you can kind of understand what happened there. And you can be like, oh, it's because I didn't like this particular genre or my take, or it's because there are actual real issues with the story and how I put it together.
Yeah, the feedback is actually a really nice, valuable thing to get back. There's actually some exchange there. Like, read my story and then I will give you feedback, as opposed to just which is kind of what you get from a lot of other things. The other nice thing is it's some good it can be some good credits. When if you're querying, you put in a query letter, one thing that you have to put is like, well, what are your other credits? And if this is the only thing you've ever written, you're like, none, which is okay. You can absolutely say, like, I don't have anything, and that's fine. But it helps boost that up a little bit to say, oh yes, I was a finalist in this thing. It's just something, just shows that you're not completely bonkers, although of course you are because you're a writer, but and sometimes you get a copy of a thing with your stuff written in it that you can send to your mom and say, look, I haven't wasted my whole degree or whatever, You get some warm fuzzies too.
Yeah, I think especially in the early stages. I know when I went from writing novels to trying to do screenplays and TV, like there weren't a lot of resources and I wasn't in LA, right? So it's like I couldn't just go to a workshop or meet people and figure out like how to do this thing. And I used contests as a gauge, and I was like, okay, I'm just gonna, I wrote this thing. I have no idea if it's any good. I don't have any contacts. I'm going to submit it to 2 contests and see what happens. I ended up submitting it to 4, and it was quarterfinaling like right off the bat. And I was like, okay, so I'm doing something right. And it gave me the confidence to invest more time and money and resources into learning how to do this better. That I wouldn't have had if I didn't have anybody to like share that with and start to get feedback and just pressure test. Like, is this any good? And am I doing something that is worth investing even more time and energy in.
Yeah, and that's a really good point, is that you don't have to win to get good feedback, to get an idea, that this litmus test that if it's any good. Like you said, you're quarter filing, you're honorable mentioning, you're like, okay, yes, good. That's probably all you need.
And I would also encourage people, though, to pay attention to the scale of the competition and the contest, right? So, like, yes, there are contests that happen monthly or quarterly. There are ones that are only happening once a year. Like a lot of the screenwriting competitions that I enter now have between anywhere from 2,500 to 8,000 submissions. That's a lot.
Yeah.
So I think it's like you have to set your expectations based on like how many people are actually applying, how many winners are there, and knowing that like, oh, if I get to this far, if I get to a second round, even if I don't final, that's still, the top 25% or the top 10% of all of the people applying. Whereas like if I'm doing something and there's only 50 entries and I'm 45, then I'm like, oh, okay, like there's something happening here and I need to sort of reassess or reevaluate.
Yeah. Back to the drawing board. Absolutely. Yeah. And that's an important thing to know. So yeah, some of these contests are tiny and some of them are enormous. And yeah, especially in screenwriting. Because I remember back in my day, there was a little while where I was looking at screenwriting, and I remember I entered some contests and like it's just crickets, because I was one of, like I said, like 8,000 entries. It's like, oh, no, it's not.
It's ridiculous. But they are, to Mary's point, they are subjective, right? Yes. So it's still one person's opinion. Like I've been a reader for a couple of different competitions now, and I will say the level of training you get in judging is usually minimal. So
yeah, there's no rubric. There's just no like, is this any good?
Right. There may be a scoring sheet, there may not, but it's usually like, hey, how did they rate on these 6 things? And it's really up to you and your own knowledge and opinion of writing whether or not they did well on each of those components or elements. So, and depending on the volume that you're reading, I've had ones where I've had to read entire books, right? And so if I'm scoring, 3 or 4 people's books, that's a lot. And so it does start to get like, ooh, if I just didn't like this world or this genre, that does sometimes bias my scoring. And some competitions are better at, matching judges to entries and trying to account for that and eliminate bias, but it happens. So I think if you're going to do this, you have to go in knowing that, especially for the larger competitions, that there's other things, again, still besides just the quality of your work, that are going to impact your score or how you place.
I think if you need some sort of quantitative measure of your skill of success, writing is probably not the field for you. Like if you're the kind of person who needs to know, all right, am I 30%, 40% to my goal? What are the clear path? And like maybe you're gonna be very frustrated here.
I mean, no clear path.
I don't want to discourage anyone from writing ever. But just to say that, just in general, that's just kind of how it goes here. That's how we do. All right, so let's talk about some of the downsides of doing contests.
Well, there's money.
That's the big one.
And entry fees. I saw on Twitter, like, this woman stopped doing entering contests, and instead, every time she saw a contest she wanted, she would, like, pay herself the entry fee, and she ended up with, like, $4,000. I was like, oh my gosh.
Yeah. You can really spend a lot of money. Now, if this is your hobby, and if this is what you're doing for fun, and if you're looking at, like, a intramural sport, which nothing wrong with that.
Right.
Then great. If all you want, if you want to spend money to go in a contest and win contests, that makes you happy, do it. Go for it. Absolutely. But if you are trying to make a career in writing, trying to be professional about it, you're going to have some diminishing returns after a certain point.
Yes. And it's not the only path. I guess that's my big advice, is like, it is not the only entryway into like building a career as a writer. And in fact, many people have entered things into competitions that have not won, that have gone on to sell. And so there's no, what's the word? I don't know. I don't know the science of
Correlation.
Correlation. Thank you.
Is that the word you're looking for?
That's the word. There's not always a direct correlation between winning competitions and selling, or vice versa.
Yeah. Oh, yeah. He could definitely win a competition and then never sell the screenplay. Absolutely, or the story.
Yeah.
I mean, yeah. And also look at what you win, right? Like, is it a piece of paper that they printed off? Yay! Actually, one of the first contests that I entered was there's a science fiction convention near me called WindyCon, and every year they do a fiction contest, and the prize is like a little thing, but you get your hotel room and no, was it your hotel room? I think it's your hotel room and your con badge comped.
Nice.
So that comes out to like several $100s. Like, that was a good prize. And your stories in the program book, which is given to every person at the con, which will include people who are in publishing. So, that was
Right.
a good contest.
Yeah, that's.
But if here's a $200 entry fee, and then you will get the opportunity to buy our collection. You're like, wait, hold on.
Which, it sounds like a joke, but those are out there.
Oh, absolutely. Absolutely. And you're like, wait, you're making a business. This is how you're making money. This is your business, and I am your customer now because I'm paying you. Wait a minute. Yeah.
Yeah, I would say, like, do your research, look at the winners, the past winners, talk to other writers about the competitions you're thinking about entering. There's a lot of blog posts and articles about really great competitions that will help you sort of narrow something down to your genre, your niche, or is going to give you the kind of feedback you're looking for, opportunities, exposure, etc. So do a little bit of that research beforehand, and that will also help you from falling prey to people who are just trying to take your money.
Yeah, it's definitely a risk reward evaluation of, okay, what am I putting out here? What do I get back? And there's nothing wrong with charging an entry fee. Let's get that straight, because oftentimes that goes to the running of the contest. Even just like materials, printing things out, hopefully giving a small stipend to the judges, which might be like a mug, whatever. It's just they do need that. And so there's if it's a reasonable fee, then, and you feel comfortable paying it, and if you look at what you get in return, if it's worth it to you, go for it. But don't feel like you have to, that like, this is part of my career. I have to pay these fees so that I can get these contests. And be aware, if the price is really high, like, well, what comes from that? I mean, Writers of the Future, I believe, is no entry fee, unless I'm mistaken. It's been a while, but I don't remember ever paying them. And if you win, you get like this all expenses paid trip to the finals, and there's a whole workshop, and it's a huge thing, and it's well noticed. If you like won Writers of the Future, people pay attention to that. So okay, yeah, that's a bar, right? Like,
yeah, I think that's most of my advice. I guess the other thing I would just want to share with listeners is that I think the downside to doing too many competitions is that you can lose sight of the story you're trying to tell, and like, you could start to, like, if you're getting too many rejections, or you're getting mixed messages or mixed feedback, it can start to really play with your mind. You can start to think that a piece is worthless or not very good. And again, just like submitting, sometimes you don't know the full context behind why something is scoring poorly or not finaling. So if you're prone to that, and rejection is hard, just be wary of how many times you expose your psyche to that process.
It's always that difficult balance, isn't it? Because at one point you have to believe in yourself and believe in your work and love it. The other half, you have to kind of check and make sure, is this something that's going to work for people other than me? And if you figured out that balance, let me know, because damn. But yes, contests are no different. No matter what it is, you always have that balance. That's a really good point.
Yeah, and thankfully I have real life writers with a lot of experience who also can read stuff and give me, like, I can sort of check that with, like, is this how other people are actually reacting? And if it's not, then I can, like, sort of set that aside.
Yeah, you could enter contests with friends too. That's kind of nice because then you can say, "Hey, have you heard back? What did you say?" And like see what they wrote and see what you wrote, and that's kind of a fun thing. We were doing that for a while with Writers of the Future. It was a bunch of us all entering at the same time. We were all kind of talking to each other. So
yeah, that's great. There's a lot of Facebook groups and communities online that you can join that are for specific contests too.
Well, great. Well, I hope you all can try entering in some contests. If you want. If you don't, then don't enter them. Taking a strong stand. Hot take. But I guess we'll wrap up there. Do you have anything else, Melissa?
No, I have no words of wisdom. Okay. I think
we're out. Fresh out.
Done.
Well, we do have these words of wisdom, and they are this. Writing is hard.
So take it easy.
I'm Mary.
And I'm Melissa.
Bye, guys.
Bye.